So if you're looking for an easy career, if you're looking for a laid back career, something that isn't so stressful, this is not the one for you. If you're looking for something that will constantly push you beyond your limits and something that is rewarding on a global scale, even if you intend to stay local, make friends from all over the world, very, very different people to who you are and who you're used to being around and learning so much from, this is the place to be.
Hi, welcome to Project Management Matters. This is a podcast about all things project management, from projects, programs, portfolios, and everything in between. I have a special guest in this episode, Emad Aziz, a dear friend, colleague, partner, collaborator, and everything in between. Emad, welcome to this special episode. It's so good to see you. It's been a while. We were just chatting about having not seen each other for quite a while. So welcome on the show. I'm excited to have you.
Philip, thank you so much. And first of all, congratulations on this wonderful show. I've been following it ever since you created it. Lots of great people and great insights. I've learned a lot from it. Congratulations. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of it. I'm really truly humbled that you considered me as a guest for this. And as we say in our mother tongue, Mabruk Habibi, on this great achievement.
Thank you so much. And one of the things that is very amazing about our experience over the last couple of years, maybe a decade, a little more than that now, is that we
Couple of
have
decades.
basically been involved in a joint mission, specifically in the Middle East region, and more so globally as well in advancing project management. So Imad and I share that passion, reaching out to the broader Middle East, advocating on behalf of project management. We met back in 2008 when Imad invited me to be a keynote speaker at the P2P conference in Cairo. And Imad was, I think you had recently launched Brisk Consulting, and it's gone from being a national to an international to a global organization advocating on behalf of project management. And you've been also a very active volunteer leader in PMI. So I'm looking forward to exploring that journey with you in this episode.
Thank you so much, Philip. I hope I meet your expectation.
Absolutely. Let's get started by talking about the environment that we were working in for the past decade and a half. It's a complex environment, but very interesting and was experiencing a great deal of growth. What I want to do is start a little bit with your journey. What pulled you into project management? What got you excited about it? Tell us a little bit about that.
So yeah, it's a very interesting perspective because I can't help but think while you were talking about the Projects to the Point conference and our experiences together over the decade and a half and so on, I can't help but remember how rigid the region was when it came to project management and the understanding that there are global best practices and global standards that would help transform the entire project management experience. And when you look at the contrast between that and what happens when you just open LinkedIn and go through the notifications, all these great events happening all over the region about addressing project management and all the thought leadership that's out there and all the challenges and competitions, it's becoming very difficult to actually keep up with all that. To your question about what dragged me into project management is, without dwelling a lot on what that specific background was, I migrated by choice from a very routine kind of job, if you like, very early on in my career to project management. And my first ever exposure was in a very political context, where I was exposed to what at the time was called the European Project Cycle Management Handbook, which was a handbook written by the European Union about project management. And I got involved in the first project. I was very junior at the time. And then I decided to actively pursue a career in project management and become a professional career project management manager. And that decision came from simply making magic happen. Project managers bring, there are so many cliches, so many things that are said about us, who we are, and what we do. But basically, we get things done, we make things happen. And whether you're employed somewhere or you consult someone or you contract for someone or something, you will always have that inner satisfaction pointing at something and say, "Hey, I made that happen. I I was the reason. I was the catalyst that put all the elements together and produced this building or this system or this product and so on." And that satisfaction justified all the long hours, all the humongous spreadsheets, all the calculations, all the communication, the conflict, the frustration. I think that eternal sense of achievement, if you like, is what drew me into this profession.
One of the things that I think has a very unique bend with your background, Emad, is that beyond just simply the interest and the passion for project management, you are an individual that kind of combines project management with entrepreneurship and business. It's kind of all those three catalysts that come together in that unique way that allow you to be a force in terms of that drive for project management. Did you fall into entrepreneurship by mistake, or was that something that you set out to do and get involved in setting up a business and leveraging project management in that area?
So, Philip, actually, this is a very good point because um, my very last position was that I was the head of transformation, as they called it, for one of the global banks at the time. This was a very long time ago. At the time, it was the seventh largest bank in the world. And whenever I gave someone my business card and it said head of transformation, you can imagine what my friends would say, but let's put that aside. When I gave that to a client, they would be, "Well, I'm sorry, what do you mean by transformation? What do you do?" And then I explained that, "Oh, well, I had the PMO, I had the strategic PMO." And they'd come back and say, "Well, what's a PMO, right?" And I owe a lot of my learning and my experience to my time in that position at that organization. But then that organization was a bank, as I said, and I hit the glass ceiling. There was simply no further room for promotion up that vertical because at the end the PMO is a support function. And I thought to myself, right, I'm young relatively at the time. I'm young, I'm single. Do I really want to migrate into banking or probably make the shift into IT or anything like that? And then I realized, well, I got my Prince 2 practitioner. I got my PMP. I got my diploma from Cambridge in project management with distinction. I got my European cycle management cert. No, I've invested so much time and effort learning something that I'm so passionate about. I'm going to set out and do this on my own. And and that was actually a step that I made with my completely at will. It's not like I was made redundant, for example. Um, I quit while I was at the top of it. I quit mid-year, so I didn't wait for my annual bonus or anything like that. I said, "All right, I need to take the plunge. It's either now or never." And I started Brisk at that time, and back in this was mid 2006.
That's incredible. And that's quite the journey considering the growth that we've experienced really across the entire globe. The 2006 through 2010 era was a very interesting one because it saw a significant amount of growth in the profession for a variety of reasons, but also specifically outside the US. And for those of us like myself, I actually made the shift outside the US in that time frame, and you had a global boom happening, and global booms often associate with big projects and big opportunities. So it makes sense that you saw that a lot of transformation, a lot of opportunity. How was the scene in terms of PMI and project management in the region from your perspective, and specifically perhaps in Egypt? I know that the chapter over there is quite old in terms of how long it's been around, but I'd be interested in how you got introduced to specifically PMI and how you got involved in PMI.
So the exposure to PMI was very interesting in that it happened purely by happenstance. I did my Prince 2 foundation and practitioner, and then I said, all right, I need to do something with more exposure, with a bigger scale. So I did that distance learning diploma with Cambridge. And as part of what they do, they assign a supervisor who's accredited by Cambridge in whichever country you're from, right? And this was all before I started Brisk. And the supervisor, he said to me, I said, I have my Prince 2 certs and all that. Is there something else I should do? And he said, well, there's a certification called the PMP, and there's an organization called PMI that oversees the certification. And they have a chapter, and he gave me the address of the chapter then. Um, I wouldn't, his words were, I wouldn't really advise you to go and get that certification unless you're a civil engineer, which I'm not. And I knocked the doors of the chapter, and then I started exploring what the PMP was and what PMI is and so on. And I felt that the PMP has what the what at the time, now this is back in 2004, right? Um, at the time, the and I'm not privy to Prince 2 right now and what the content is, so I can't say this for PMP versus Prince 2 today. But 21 years ago, 22 years ago, they were very complementary to each other. Prince 2 was very heavy on governance, while PMP was very heavy on tools, techniques, and process. And I thought to myself, I want to get the certification done because this complements my skill set, complements my competencies, and rather than having to struggle to find ways of how things are done, um, it's right there. It's in the pinbox, and I applied. I got the certificate, and then I got this whole package, membership package, with all the specific interest groups that I could apply to, and I kept ticking them all, and all these PMI events, and I went to the first Congress, PMI Global Congress. I remember in Malta. My first PMI Global Congress was the EMEA one that was in Malta in 2008, and that was it. I got hooked on the PMI train ever since. So that's how I got involved with PMI. And great things happen when you stay involved with PMI, as we used to say.
It's incredible hearing the story. I didn't realize that Malta was your first Congress. Of course, the conference in Malta is a special one for me because I was PMI chair at the time. So it's
Yes,
an interesting dynamic because we did see, given the proximity actually to the region, a lot of people from the Middle East came to Malta specifically because of how easy and close it was to the conference. So it's interesting that that was your first event, and I
it
appreciate that.
was.
One of the things that I was fascinated with as really a success story is the P2P conference. Because for me, it was one of the first events that I saw that an individual and an organization like yours was able to leverage the global profession to bring it into a local context for the benefit of the community, whether it's the business environment or the government. I think it would be worthwhile to talk a little bit about that experience, how that idea came about, what is P2P, and what was the driver, because there are a lot of great successes and lessons learned that I think are worth sharing.
Philip, thank you. I'm delighted to hear that. What? 19 years since the first P2P, maybe. I think, Philip, that even if we had planned the segue from or the transition from my experience with PMI in Malta to P2P, it wouldn't have been done so well. This is a great sequence of events, if you like, because in Malta, I was just fascinated. I had never been to so I've been to so many conferences and exhibitions in the before Malta, but never one like the PMI Global Congress. I was fascinated, and I didn't know Greg Balistrero at the time, and I went to him. I stood in line for a very long time. I introduced myself. I introduced the chapter in Egypt, and I said, I'm on my own now. I have this company that I run, and we'd very much like for you to come to Egypt the next year, 2009, and we'll sponsor it. And the reason why I made that offer was because there was so much wealth of knowledge. There was so much networking happening, exchange of ideas, this whole volunteering, this whole vibe around volunteering, and for me, I mean, just remembering it, I could still recall how exciting I felt. I mean, when I see my 8-year-old at Disneyland, I remember the look, and I see the look at her face. I remember how I felt at the time, right? And he said, "Well, you need to speak to this person." And I went and I met that person, and she said to me, "Well, there's an online process you need to follow to apply. Here's the link, and we'll ask you a few questions, but we have the next 8 years lined up." I said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "Well, we have destinations chosen for the next 8 years." And I scratched my head and I thought, all right, she plans for 8 years. We don't plan for 8 minutes. And all right, okay, that's interesting. Well, how can we create a success story in Egypt for the region, right? Um, Before 2017 or 2018 and or 2016, I can't remember. And I came back. I spoke with my colleagues, and we found that the best thing for us to do was to create a replica of the PMI Global Congress to the best of our ability, have it under the auspices of the government, invite the chapter, and invite speakers from PMI, and then invite PMI itself to come over, and hopefully someone would listen to us. We had, in 2008, we had the first P2P. The Global Congress was in March, if I'm not mistaken, and or in May maybe, and we had the first P2P conference and exhibition in October of 2008. We had 4 speakers and 3 exhibitors, and we were blessed that the PMI board of directors sent us the PMI chair at the time, yourself. I remember Ricardo came as well, and we had 600 attendees from Egypt and the region around us: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Libya, and so on. And in 2009, that, all right, we have this great event, let's replicate it again and see our luck. And we had the auspices of 6 ministers. We had 17 speakers fly in. The 4 speakers were PMI speakers as well at the time from one of the SIGs. The following year, 2009, we had 17 speakers from all sorts of different backgrounds and specializations, and to bring our audience, or create an audience that would listen to us. We split it into verticals, so we had an agile track, and an IT and telecom track, a construction track, and so on. And the speakers, if you remember, you did that to your presentation. You tweak it a little bit to fit the construction environment, and then retweak it again to fit the IT and telecom and healthcare and oil and gas all these different parallel tracks, if I remember correctly. We had something around 50 maybe exhibitors, and we had 1,200 attendees, and it was wild. We still look at the photos, and they're on the Facebook page. The Facebook page is there. We still look at the photos, and we cannot fathom how we managed to pull that off, and everything was there. All the factors of success. We had PMI bookstore exhibiting books. We had PMI Educational Foundation raising awareness and creating clout around what it does and how it interacts with all the different stakeholders. We had PMI board of directors, past, present, and incoming. It was just an amazing experience, Philip. And again, it was a very regional event. And then the following one in 2010, then the events of 2011 came and took P2P with it. But then we had one further iteration in 2017 in Egypt. And then we made the decision to hold it off and not have any more events because given what happened during the events of 2011, other regional events that were organized by governments at the time sprung up and started happening very successfully. And we thought that there's no point in competing. At the end, it's one region with one group of audience, right? There's no point in competing. And then another country came with its own event and so on. So actually, there are too many events on the scene right now that if I spend my time attending, I won't have time to work. But and they're all great. They're all fantastic. There's so much material going on, so much to learn, and so much thought leadership happening. So it's all great. I think we filled a void in the market when there was one. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
and
that's it.
I think that the incredible thing about this format is that in many ways it was a standard setter for how to structure such an event. And you see it today with the master classes and the tracks and international speakers and so forth. And this event, like so many, you end up building a lot of relationships. So there's a strong community building beyond just simply attending, but rather engaging with people who become lifelong friends and colleagues from all over the globe, and you stay in touch with them and you continue to observe their professional journey as well. Kudos to that early success, and I think that that helped shape probably a lot what you did in terms of your consulting and training business as well in Egypt and beyond in the region.
I can't agree more that the best friendships I've formed in my career or my best work, quote unquote. I don't know if that's the right way of calling it. Friendships that I've formed happened because of PMI and volunteering with PMI, and also because of P2P and the relationships we've built with P2P and how we were scattered across the globe, each of us in a different country, and we were struggling with online meeting facilities at the time, and I mean, yes, the internet was there, but it was only what 10, 12, 15 years old, not as mature as it is today, and how we could all work together and pull things off like that. Um, I think that um, if it wasn't for the passion that practitioners have in this profession, we could have never pulled anything off like P2P. I mean, I can't think of P2P without thanking you and Bob Tarney and Dave Pryor and Marisa and Roberto and everyone who spoke at or attended or came to or supported or even attended the event. I mean, if it wasn't because we are all very keen on advancing the profession and seeing the potential behind it, um, uh, we could have never ever pulled off something as successful as P2P. And these are the relationships that I mean, you and I are on this call today, and everything that happened since 2008 until today are because of that collaboration and that bond and solidarity that all of us, portfolio program and project management practitioners have between us. And I cannot stress the value enough.
One of the things that you remind me of as I look to some of the people that we met in those days and many more since then is that there is a very strong common thread among many of these practitioners and professionals, including yourself, which is a passion for learning and having that lifelong learning. You talked about starting out with your PMP, and like many of our colleagues have pursued other certifications, other knowledge like the PGMP and other certifications. I would like for you to talk a little bit about that because that's an important element, especially for some people who might have the mentality, like I've gotten my bachelor's degree or I've gotten my master's, I'm done with learning. Let's explore this a little bit in the context of project management and why you've pursued that approach through your career.
So this is a very interesting point because I keep getting these questions in my line of work a lot, and I think that it's very important putting, especially for our region, putting PMI certs in their proper context and emphasizing or understanding what a professional certification really is. It is not academia. It is as far away from academia as possible, and it should be looked at as a driver's license, right? I have my PMP. That means I can drive your project for you, or I can drive a project, and it's an international one as well. And pursuing the PGMP for program management and the PFMP for portfolio management was exactly the same. Um, I I I wouldn't find a more credible way of going to an organization and saying, "Look, I can help you execute your strategy because I have the experience, but I also have this driver's license as a portfolio management professional." Oh, well, what does portfolio management have to do with strategy? And then you start speaking, and people start listening to you because you read it in the standard, and you understood it, and you got the stamp that you are qualified enough, right? Because reading and understanding something is one thing, but then getting a stamp that you actually know it is quite different. And people listen even more with more attention once you tell them that, once you show them what the certification process is for the PGMP or the PFMP, and that there are peer reviews involved, that you need to prove experience, and then you need to go through the examinations. And I was just having this conversation with one of my clients about the difference between the experience getting PMP certified and PGMP certified, and how I had to go through the peer reviews, how I had to write all these experience summaries, how they were sent back with questions, and then how demanding the examination was. I remember I had two, three, four paragraph long questions with four choices, and each choice was a paragraph in itself. And I needed to put all that together and answer in the time and pass the cert. And it was a very, very rich experience. And because I went through it with the PGMP, probably the PFMP was an easier journey. But again, it gives you the credibility, it gives you the knowledge, and it really takes a lot of understanding of how the real world operates, not what a utopian scenario would look like or what an ideal case would look like. And it gives you that flexibility to apply based on the different context you're working with.
And you've had quite a bit of experience applying that with clients you've worked with. So when you think about specifically the context of strategy execution and that gap between strategy and projects, what are some of the common themes that you've encountered, especially in the last few years when it comes to organizations not being able to bridge that gap and some of the challenges that you've heard about?
So I think that there is a very critical diversion of focus from a lot of players in the portfolio program and project management space away from organizational project management and what that means for an organization. And I know that I'll answer this question in a funnel type of way, right? I'll talk about the broader scheme of things and then specific to the very specific answer. So I think there's a very unconscious diversion, if you like, away from organizational project management, and that there's an unspoken assumption that we hire a couple guys who have their PMP, they could run this multi-mega million project over 6 years, right, and change the world, which is nothing is further away from the truth than that. And organizations need to be adapted, and reformulated in a way that accommodates the strategy and the execution of that strategy. And then many different factors come into play, like the organizational culture, the context in which the organization operates, the governance of the organization, and how that helps strategy execution or impedes it, or maybe the lack thereof. And then the inherent competition, or the inherent negation, if you like, between the delivery organization, which looks after day-to-day business and is all about efficiency and cost cutting and results, with the least resource expenditure, and then the strategy execution organization, which is all about bringing in this disruption and change and transformation to meet new goals, and that these just work against each other. And then other factors come into play, like those who are responsible for making the strategy happen and executing it are tasked to do it off the side of their desk, in addition to whatever KPIs they have to meet in their ongoing operations and ongoing business. So that creates a lot of challenges for successful strategy execution, especially in our region, because of the different maturity in the understanding, variant maturity in the understanding of what portfolio program or project management is, what does it look like on the organizational level, and the maturity of the organizations themselves. And I think that it takes a very unique kind of leader and decision maker to be open enough to understand how all these different variables play against each other or with each other, and the synergies that they need to create in their organization to enable execution.
Does that mean, from your perspective, then, that creates a sense of impatience with PMOs and PMO-like type structures in organizations? And perhaps maybe as a second element to this, I'd love to hear about your perspective in terms of how Agile impacted that overall.
So yes, that creates a lot of impatience with PMOs, as you and I define them now, and just to make sure that everyone's on the same page as you and I are, and as the what some call the strategy execution management office, or the strategic PMO or enterprise PMO. Yes, there's a lot of impatience with that, and there's also a lot of belief, or that a PMO is a it's the quickest and fastest way to execute your strategy. Yes, it is, but it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not by just setting up a PMO you start getting results in a couple of months. It's going to take probably years before you start seeing material results from that PMO. Um, and there's always, and I think that this is magnified in our region, that there's always a tendency to believe that the technical folks, right? So if you're in a construction company and you're trying to change or modernize the way that construction company is operating, digital enablement or transformation, rebranding, leaner organizations, leaner practices, and all that. There's this ancient belief that the technical folks could make it happen. Well, yes and no. Maybe they could make it happen, but even if they could make it happen, that means that's a complete diversion from what they need to do on a day-to-day basis, and then the rivalries come up and all that. So I think that yes, people are impatient with PMO, but they also need to understand that it takes a very special breed of professional person to remove themselves from that change, own it, and make it happen. That's my take on the first part of your question. Now, agile has definitely impacted strategy execution. I don't want to be judgmental and say that it was good for it or it was bad for it, but I think that there is this misconception that agile on its own is going to fix all the problems in the world, right? We've got famine in whatever country. Oh, use agile and you'll fix that. And as much as I know a lot of people that would be typing up in the comments saying, yes, agile is the solution to everything in the world, all the problems in the world, I think that in an organizational context, there need to be boundaries around agile. There needs to be consideration of organizational constraints of time and cost and benefit realization, and then agile operates within that sphere, right? Within those boundaries. You could be as agile as you want as long as you don't exceed any of those organizational tolerances. Um, and I think that's how people started now to understand the value of hybrid methodologies and how those come into play. And I think that my own hypothesis is in 10, 15 years, if we're still alive, and I hope we are, we'll see that the the entire ecosystem of agile versus waterfall versus hybrid has disappeared, and then we've got just one body of knowledge called the project management body of knowledge. That's just a combination of all this in a very what we call today hybrid setup. Because if you go back and look at PMBOK and how PMBOK 2, which is what I studied to get my PMP, was structured, it's got these overarching process groups, right? And then you've got, I don't know, last version was 40, the fourth edition was 49 processes, and you needed to pick out which tool, pick out which process, fit which case, which scenario, which context you were dealing with. And that's just being hybrid, right? Where things are today is that we're bringing in all these agile practices, burn down charts and iterations and velocity calculations, and all that. We're bringing that into that toolbox, right? So in the essence of it, you still have some planning involved, initiation, and then followed by planning, and then execution, and you need to monitor it and control it, and then you close it, right? That because that's a logical sequence of events. But then you've got this richer toolkit with all the new, quote unquote, agile tools. So I think that there was a time when agile disrupted strategy execution in a way where we're all held back and said, whoa, what's happening? But then with time, we started to understand, well, it's not a black and white thing. We're still in the gray area. We still have the flexibility. We can still pick and choose what tools apply to which contexts. And actually, that's the core of our job as magic makers, as project managers, right? And here we are today.
The interesting thing, I've been speaking with a colleague recently about this specific topic. You have this general attitude by some who perhaps either did not like planning or were not ones who excelled in planning and thought, oh, if I just simply dump that boring part of project management and take on agile, everything will be hunky dory. And what they didn't realize is that agile actually requires even more planning and
Yes.
more discipline in terms of making things happen. It's just a different way of working, not really abandoning planning altogether. And that's the epiphany that many people, finally started understanding, that it's not just simply a free for all and you get to do whatever you want and then maybe something will happen or it doesn't. I want to shift a little bit about and talk about PMOs. And you've had in your career quite a bit of experience running and building PMOs. So in the context of your engagement with organizations who are interested in building PMOs, what is perhaps one of the questions that is a very uncomfortable question that you like to ask to get some insight into the organization and their interest? And then maybe as part of that process, what is one or two things that you might look for that would give you a hint that, this project is destined for success or maybe destined for something a little less like success?
Well, now you're hitting me with all difficult questions, Philip, and now I understand why you wouldn't send me a script to prepare, right? So 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 Philip, I think that one of the key questions to ask any organization on why they want to have a PMO, if that was your question, is really why do you want to have a PMO and what do you want to get out of it? And there are so many instances today in 2026 where, well, 2025 really, where early 2026, where you hear an answer that makes sense. We need someone to look at our strategic projects. We need someone to bring change and transform the company. All these great things. But then there are answers when you probe a little bit that you start finding patterns that maybe are not maybe are not clearly articulated or spoken, where you see that they want to have a PMO because either their board wants a PMO, but they don't understand why. That wasn't clearly cascaded or communicated. Or they want to have a PMO because their competitor has one. Or they want to have a PMO because it's cool sounding and they want to retain some talent, so they bring them into the PMO. Or they want to have a PMO because they have expectations of that organization that organization will never bring about, right? And it's your job, it's your professional duty as a consultant to guide the discussion and guide the conversation in a way where you can really trace the benefit, the return on that investment, because building a PMO is probably building the most difficult organization or the most difficult component of the organization because of its cross-cutting nature, right? You got a PMO, it has a head that's reporting into a C-level person or maybe a chief projects officer, depending on the organization, right? Very high up in the organization, you've got these really polished, really talented people, but then it can't do anything on its own. It needs to work across the organization with all the support functions and all the frontliners, and it needs to report into management, senior management, and it needs to manage resources with very limited authority in matrix organizations and so on. So it really is a very expensive, very daunting experience for the organization and for you as a consultant or a team of consultants, depending on the context. And then there's all the PMIS that you install, the software, and then configuring that to the organization, to the context, the methodology. You know, I mean, you're the best at this that I know, and and I learned a lot from you, Philip, and you know how taxing that could be of organizations. And you need to make sure before you start that journey, you need to make sure that the organization can really trace the benefit um, of doing that, and that they have the grit to stay in the game and to hold on to it, because everything seems like a failure. You know, setting up a PMO is just a project, right? It's just another project. It's actually a program, and every project or program during execution looks like a failure, right? Until you start actually delivering and delivering meat, and that meat tastes good, right? Until that happens, it comes across as a complete failure. So you need to make sure that they have the justification, they see the return, they see the potential coming out of it, and at the same time that they have the willingness, the capability, and the grit to see it through the other end. Um, that's the first part of the question. The second part of what are indicators of success on a project, and what are indicators of maybe failure. I think that there are quite a few that are blatant indicators, right? You can't go wrong with, right? If a project has very, very clear justification, and that justification can be traced down into all the project artifacts and elements, right? Then that's the first pillar of success, right? If I can say why I'm doing that project and how I'm going to achieve the why behind that project, or from that project, then we're good, right? That this is the first fundamental pillar to understand whether a project is going to succeed or not. And then, if there's a very clear plan on how are we going to reach that, why, how are we going to reach that justification, that goal, that's your second indicator. And the third indicator is that if you have the right people, and by the right, I mean technically adept, they understand what project management is and how to make projects succeed. They have the proper uh, business acumen, they have the proper understanding of how every decision they make, every move they make impacts that why, impacts the outcome of the project, impacts the realization of the benefit. Um, and that also they have the people skills, the communication, the leadership, the conflict resolution, they're not easily intimidated. They have the character, the charisma, the persona to make it happen. So if we have these three elements in place, then we have very high chances of success. If any of those elements is missing, if it's reparable, maybe you can turn it around and rescue that project. But if it's not reparable, then that project is never going to succeed. Um, and it's very important to clarify, just a caveat slash disclaimer, that why um, needs to be quantifiable. We're doing this project because the boss said we should do it. It's not a reason why you do a project, right? As long as you can measure it and it's quantifiable and makes sense and it's traceable to the strategy, there are very high chances of success.
I think you're right because a lot of times when projects get in trouble, especially PMO setup projects, and you look at mechanisms that may have been poor execution or poor planning and so forth, there's always that kind of seed that starts with that justification, as you mentioned. If you don't know what success looks like, and even worse, if the definition of success changes on a daily basis or every conversation, I recall a colleague of mine was telling me that on a consulting engagement that she had, she would go and talk to the client every few days, and she would ask the same question, and she would get a different answer every time she asked that question. And she knew that it was trouble from the beginning. That if you're getting a different answer, it just means that maybe there's a lack of clarity on why we're here, and that's a danger because you cannot really use that as an anchor to drive forward, your mission gets distorted. And that's obviously one side of the house. The other side, which is the change management, and you've got a little bit of expertise in change management. I think you've co-authored the book on the topic. So that's another element where organizations sometimes tend to underestimate the change management dynamics that are needed beyond the basic block and tackle of putting that together. I guess the key question that comes to mind in the way that you introduce change management, how do you best present it to clients and partners in the context of project management? Do you tend to espouse kind of an approach where you share that this is a different discipline side by side or part and parcel? Tell us a little bit about that, and I'd love to also hear about the journey of writing the book as well, and the reason you chose that
Okay.
topic.
So I was hoping you'd ask. So I think that the interesting thing about change management, and it's also the interesting thing about what we do for a living in the PPPM context, is that it's all about why we go to work every day, right? Um, Anyone would be resistant to change if they don't see the value in that change, right? We all get out of bed and go somewhere to do something to get some sort of value, right? If you're a company, obviously you're there to make profit and create products and make the world a better place. But if you're a government, maybe you're there to improve citizens' lives, and there are so many different definitions of value, but at the end, it all boils down to value, right? What it is that you're trying to create, and I think that when you present it to customers, you need to, it being change management, you need to show them the value of making the change a catalyst, using the change. I'm losing my vocabulary here. Using the change as a catalyst for adopting and sustaining the benefits of the PMO, or adopting and sustaining the benefits of that specific project or program. Um, and it could be as simple as deploying an ERP system, or changing premises, or changing the logo of a company, right? But if there isn't a structured, disciplined change initiative, or undertaking, it's probably bigger than an initiative. If there isn't a properly sized, properly planned out change undertaking, the outcome of that project, no matter how small or how big, may never come to fruition. There are chances that you'll produce the product very, very successfully, but people won't adopt it, or people will adopt it and then regress and stop using it, and then you will have issues with sustainment of the benefits from that project. So it's very important that you bring in that element of change management, and it's very important that you either make it very clear to the customer that this is a standalone undertaking that is directly related to the project or program, or the project to bring in the PMO or create the PMO, or you integrate that effort within the actual program of establishing the PMO. So it's inherently there, and it comes across as, this is part and parcel of. It's just as important as building the methodology, just as important as picking the right PMIS and configure it, just as important as creating all the SLAs with all the different departments and hiring the folks and training them, even if from within and so on. You also need to create all these communication exercises, all these polls and opinion gathering, all these uh, uh, benefit versus reassurance undertakings, to make sure that people actually uh, adopt it and sustain it. Now, on the journey of the book, this is a very interesting story because um, in 2013, PMI came up with what was called, I think it's still there, the Managing Change in Organizations, a Practice Guide. And being a PMI shop, we got our hands on probably what was very hot off the press at the time. And I read the whole thing in record time. And I wrote back to PMI and I said, this is great. This is absolutely fantastic, but there's a lot more. And they said, well, come over. Let's have a conversation. Let's get online and have a conversation. I said, well, I'm in New York. You're 3 hours away. I'll just drive to Philly and we can have a meeting. And I went there, and it was a great experience going to PMI headquarters. And I met with PMI and I said, look, there's so much more that could be done. And I explained, I spilled out my brains. I really spent the 3 hours driving, thinking of what is it, how to structure my thoughts, and the response was amazing. They said, you know what, great stuff. Put a manuscript together, and we'll see if that's worth anything. But this is a practice guide, and maybe we could have a book. Maybe we could publish your book if you've got something to say, and we'll see. And driving back the 3 hours, I remember I was thinking and recording notes on how exactly to go about this, because I wanted it to be not just a book. I wanted it to be something that PMI would recognize as an extension to managing change in organizations, a practice guide. I said, all right, it needs to be what goes into a PMI practice guide. It needs to have multiple folks need to write it. That's number one. Number two, it needs to represent all different traits, right? Trades, excuse me. Someone from IT, someone from construction, someone from government, someone from business, and so on and so forth. It needs to represent folks from different countries. It needs to represent different opinions, not just one way of doing things, right? Otherwise it becomes Emad's way. And I went back and I created this very long list of folks who spoke at P2P, who I attended sessions for or read works for, and I started working the phone. Hey, Philip, are you interested in this? Yes, I am. I remember your response, but you said you needed some time to think about it, and you gave me the disappointment of my life. You were too busy to contribute. But then so many great people accepted, and we put the manuscript together. It took us actually 4 years. Sorry, 4 years to put together a manuscript. And I didn't realize how difficult it was with so many cooks in the kitchen, so many chefs in the kitchen, to put together a manuscript. And boy, was that a challenge. And then I remember we had to hire an editor internally and all that. And 4 years later, I wrote to PMI saying, here's the manuscript. And they said, all right, it takes, I don't know, a lifetime to come back and say whether we'll publish this or not. But I remember the decision was made and the book was published in 6 weeks. And I remember that this was the fastest publication that they had ever put through. Or there's no official, I mean, someone could say, no, why was faster? Well, that's fine. But at the time, maybe that is what I was told at the time. And when submitting the front matter of the book in the preface, I wrote the story. I wrote the whole story about how managing change in organizations inspired this work, but there was a lot more. And I went to PMI and I said this and all that, and I was surprised that PMI published that in the preface. And the book was out in 2017, and I was floored, Philip, when I looked at Twitter at the time, and it said new practice guide out. And I was just, that was one of the greatest moments of my career.
And that's quite an accomplishment. I think that
Thank you.
You managed to not only put together a well-run project, but the outcome as well turned out to be very positive and had a great deal of positive influence on the profession. So kudos on
And,
that accomplishment.
thank you. And just to add, just working with all these great people and all these great minds, and learning from each and every one of them, and learning about management. Not forget about the subject matter, right? That's the whole. That's I mean that's an amazing experience. But even what was even more amazing is learning how to manage such senior people, and get them to work together with synergy. That was something I needed to learn, that's
Absolutely.
like a great byproduct. Amazing.
So Ahmad, as we look to the future and as we look at the generations to come, especially individuals who are looking at joining the ranks of project management, and by the way, not necessarily just young people, but also people who might be making a career change, what are some nuggets of wisdom or advice you can give these individuals as they consider whether project management is a good home for them?
You're looking to me for wisdom. Well, I'd say that it's a lot of work. It's a lifetime of work. But I cannot imagine a career as rewarding simply because we make things happen, right? There's every piece of work that you do. There will always be something out there to remind you of that achievement. And if you work hard enough, maybe you're lucky enough to have someone as great and as looked up to like Philip interview you on his program, which I still can't get my head around, that I've come this far. Uh, there is no end to it. You keep working hard, you keep learning, you keep contributing, meeting great people, learning more. It's a lifetime commitment. I remember when I first applied for PMP, and there was this RPMP designation for retired PMPs, and this was back in 2004 when I first saw that, and I yet have to see an RPMP. I know a lot of, sadly, I know some RIP PMPs, but I don't know RPMPs. It's the work of a lifetime. You keep learning, and you keep giving back, and you keep growing, for as long as you're alive. So if you're looking for an easy career, if you're looking for a laid back career, something that isn't so stressful, this is not the one for you. If you're looking for something that will constantly push you beyond your limits, and something that is rewarding on a global scale, even if you intend to stay local, make friends from all over the world, very, very different people to who you are and who you're used to being around, and learning so much from. This is the place to be. If uh, you just need to get your ducks in a row and go for it.
Thank you so much for these kind words and for the words of wisdom that you've shared. As always, this
Thank you,
has been
Philip.
an interesting conversation, very intellectually stimulating, and
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. For those of you who have been with us on this episode, I want to take this time to thank you, and until we meet next time, goodbye.
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you, and thank you all for watching.